My whole point was God has a right to judge, not humans. God has a right to judge if this is what human nature is most like.
The whole thing is just an outright dehumanization of this, this rival group of people.
What this reveals is that your methodology is shit.
How do you guys miss this stuff?
He was fully implying that you are a racist.
It doesn't matter what you think is most likely the case, because you are ill-equipped to judge that data.
It's telling, right? Like, they have to do this.
Do you hear the mixing? If you buy the narrative, if it's true, and then immediately, that's just the ancient world. Stick with one.
Why, hello, my fellow apes. I hope you are well. This is the third and probably the final episode in which Dr. Joshua Bowen, Dr. Kipp Davis, and yours truly expose the apologetic acrobatics of Michael Jones and Dr. David Falk. How are you both doing, boys?
I'm doing all right. I'm happy to be joined by not just Stephen and Josh, but his newest family member, the beard. Do I have to say anything? I don't think I have to. Do I? It's just
no.
How long are you going to do this? Are you going to do this, Kip, for 9 hours? 9 hours.
9 hours.
Oh, you're going to make me cry like Michael Jones. Come on, I can't take this.
That was well placed, my friend. That was good.
I wish we'd planned it. That would have worked out better.
No.
Oh, it's going in. It's going in.
That is perfect. Oh.
Okay, well, I very much am grateful for all three of you being here. So thank you very much. It's gonna be a good episode. Maybe this is a good place to begin. So in our previous episodes, we've raised a series of serious objections to both Michael and David. Undergirding these criticisms, and indeed the broader critique issued by Josh, Kipp, and many other scholars, is the observation that apologists like Michael and David often present themselves as authoritative figures when, in the specific contexts, they're not. Whether they're standing on a stage, being invited onto a program, or creating content to impart knowledge, they, 1, confidently assert claims that are either unsupported or outright contradicted by the scholarly consensus. 2, fail to adequately acknowledge their own limitations in areas where they lack expertise. And 3, bit of an overlap here, they mislead their audience by presenting contested or fringe views as normative or widely accepted. We have seen this with Michael Jones basically as a modus operandi at this point. Not only have we covered it in our series here, but I've also covered it with Derek from Myth Vision, where he's done a similar thing when it comes to the mythos surrounding Dionysus.
It's ongoing too. Sorry, I had to throw this in there because I just did a stream yesterday in which I had to address Michael's failed appropriation of the origins of Yahweh.
Yeah.
By hopefully helping him to see through a book written by Mark S. Smith on this topic that he clearly either misunderstands or just chose to ignore for large sections of it, right? I believe a friend of mine, the one Dapper Dinosaur, likes to call this the employment of a Trojan source. You know, the citation that you're marshalling is actually working against you.
It's perfect. I may have come up with that independently, actually, on an episode of Low Fruit. We built a shirt, a design that went on a shirt as well, Trojan source.
Maybe he got it from you.
Hey, maybe. That would be amazing if that's the case.
I'll have to ask.
To launch this episode, we're going to examine an exchange between Michael and Josh that gets straight to the heart of our concerns. And so here it is.
You know, they'll claim the historicity of the conquest is just lacking. But when you get into the data and you compare it to what Joshua actually says, there's overwhelming evidence for an exodus and a conquest in the 13th century BC, which would be the Ramesside period.
While it is absolutely true that the consensus of scholars who hold to at least a kernel of a historical event standing behind the Exodus think it would have taken place in the 13th century, we should point out that not too long ago, Michael absolutely knew that the Exodus dated to the 15th century. That is, until a colleague spoke to him about the topic.
Which is the two cock-you fallacy.
Now, Michael had ostensibly done a great deal of research on the issue up to that point, certainly according to his own lights, and had produced videos defending that early position. Now he absolutely knows that it dates to the 13th century. I think the point here is that when you're not a subject matter expert in a particular topic, you got to be very careful in, one, choosing on whom you rely for your information, and two, making definitive claims about the data, especially when the conclusions you draw go against the consensus of subject matter experts.
I think one of the big problems that all of us face in the field is that when you come up with a new idea, you know, that can be there's a lot of data out there. I'm an Assyriologist, so there are over 500,000 cuneiform tablets between Sumerian and Akkadian. And if I make some sort of a lexicographic argument, you know, it's very difficult to cover all the ground. And while the data set is different when it comes to something like the Hebrew Bible, because you have an awful lot of archaeology to wade through, but you also have, 2+ millennia of, history of research to wade through. It can be very difficult, I think, to fully engage with everything that's out there in such a way that if you wrote a history of research chapter, that it would be considered well done. And I think because of that, often online, we're in positions where we want to come out with the next video. We want to come out with something kind of sexy and, grabbing. And unfortunately, these can be very complicated issues. And as Kipp and I were talking about actually this week, one of the big problems that non-specialists face, as clever as they are and as well-intended and, autodidactic, as they are, it's still very difficult to know who the players are in the field that are reputable. So I think what ends up happening then, and Ed, we can talk about this a little more after we see his response, but I think what ends up happening is you find someone that you think is well-spoken, she's very articulate, and she's published this book or he's published this book. Seems very convincing to me, and it happens to align with the position that I already hold. And you stand very confidently on that, not realizing maybe that the position that they hold is not widely accepted or even hasn't been around long enough to have been thoroughly reviewed by subject matter experts. I mean, there are a lot of things, I think, in the field that can make this very complicated. So just got to be careful. We all have to be careful.
Maybe another way to sort of illustrate the problems here is to look at even just an example on what I think a lot of viewers were considered, like if Josh and I have a side from our side, we do a lot of streams and we're good friends with some other channels, including Derek Lambert over at MythVision Podcast, Neil Sandleck, the Gnostic Informant.
Mm-hmm.
They have, over the last couple of years, had on a couple of terrific scholars, Gad Barnea, Jonathan Adler. Jonathan Adler, a couple of years ago, wrote this fantastic book on early Judaism, basically doing an archaeological appraisal of early Judaism in an attempt to answer the question, how far back, how early can we trace this activity, these normative features of what we would consider Judaism? How far back can we trace this as, widespread among Jewish communities? And Gad Barnea has recently started writing and publishing a lot of things that have been really exciting and challenging to earlier ideas about even just the age of the Torah or the Pentateuch or when some of these texts come together. And this is exciting stuff, right? Derek and Neil are really excited about it. They promote this work. They talk about it a lot on their channels. They're starting to kind of read a lot of the other things that they're doing through these lenses. And there are times that I feel like saying, hey, you guys, just maybe, pump the brakes a little bit. A lot of this is new. Scholars, for the most part, haven't even had much of a chance to sink their teeth into this yet. We can't call this the new settled scholarship, right? If nobody's actually taken the opportunity to carefully review it and to consider all the arguments. And that requires the input of other experts, right? A scholarship operates at a glacial pace oftentimes, right? And I think this is part of the problem, where it will frequently take years, decades for ideas to enter into the mainstream. But for a layperson, I don't think they always see those sorts of nuances and those sorts of features at work within scholarship. So yeah, it's easy to get excited about your favorite published author or your favorite idea that you read in this book. It's much harder to understand how these things are being vetted within the field by other experts.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's a really difficult thing to do on basically any topic when it comes to things like anything that pertains to historicity, like even more difficult because you have, different cultures writing about it. And it just becomes so difficult to make any kind of confident statement. It always surprises me that apologists seem to be able to do it very easily. So let's see how Michael responded to what you had to say there, Josh.
Let me just say flat out, this is poisoning the well yet again.
Of course it is.
First of all, I never said I'm absolutely sure of those things. I've always said I would be willing to change my mind if the data leads me there. And I'd say I use phrases like this is the most likely conclusion. This is the most probable explanation. I never said I'm absolutely sure. And
I think that's reasonable.
What are you talking about, Josh? Yeah.
So this is a fair point. And I can see how Michael understood my use of the phrase absolutely certain here to mean some type of precise epistemological claim, but it was not. I was using it in a much more colloquial sense, equivalent to, I've got great confidence that this is correct. I was not intending to suggest that Michael had some absolute knowledge claim about the time of the Exodus. So, fair point. But I think that's good to say up front.
Yeah.
That's a fair point. I wasn't using that phrase in a philosophical sense.
The first thing that comes to my mind here is where he said, this is poisoning the well yet again. Couple of things. First of all, this is a deflection tactic. So accusing Josh of a logical fallacy rather than addressing the substance of the criticism and thus taking it from himself and putting it on someone else. The second thing to be said is I don't think he knows what poisoning the well means. I've noticed here that he throws this around all the time, and we're going to see it again later as well. Poisoning the well is where you basically say bad things about someone before you present what they're saying, so that the viewers have in their mind that this person's a bad individual or, inadequate. And yet that's not what you're doing there. You're quite literally addressing an issue that he's ran into. It's not poisoning the well, is basically what I'm getting at. He also says that he uses qualifiers like most likely and probable, which is something that you just noted. But the problem here is that it actually contradicts the confident presentation style of his videos and the way that he goes around. So I could use phrases like most likely and probable and yet say it in such a way which implies that the scholarship thinks that this is most likely and most probable. And there is the problem right there. I'm misrepresenting the scholarship. And again, we see Michael not taking any kind of responsibility really here, but rather just saying, I made a humble claim and you are poisoning the well and being nasty to me. The last thing that I got out of that clip is he said that I never said I'm absolutely sure. But unless I'm mistaken, Josh, you never actually claimed that Michael said this.
We should point out that not too long ago, Michael absolutely knew that the Exodus dated to the 15th century. That is until a colleague spoke to him about the topic, which is that's the Tukaku fallacy. So Michael had ostensibly done a great deal of research on the issue up to that point, certainly according to his own lights, and had produced videos defending that earlier position. Now he absolutely knows that it dates to the 13th century. I mean, to be fair, that is what you said.
Yeah, and that's why
it seems clear to me that you've also got your tongue pretty firmly planted in your cheek here when you're saying this too, right? Like,
and the thing is, I'm, as I said earlier, perfectly willing to admit that could have been taken and clearly was taken in like some sort of an epistemological certainty sense. And that's like, I get it. I own that. So, I think that when we use that kind of language, as Stephen said, it's much more about the way that this is being presented than it is a statement about his epistemological certainty. And this is the other thing that I think, Stephen, that you said that is really, really important to focus on for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
It's one thing if Kipp, as a specialist in the Dead Sea Scrolls, says, I think it's most likely the case that X is true about 1Q Isaiah A. It's very different if I say, as a non-Dead Sea Scrolls specialist, I think it's most likely the case about 1Q Isaiah A that. Now, both of those are using language of non-certainty.
Mm-hmm.
Both of those, if you were to print out the words on paper, they would look exactly the same. But when Kipp says it, there is a lot behind it. When I say it, there's not.
I wouldn't say there's not. I'd say there's less, right? And maybe, sorry.
But when I say it, there's none.
But I think the point is that in this context, and that's what I think you're hitting the nail on the head here. In this context where Gavin has brought Michael on, has asked him this question about the state of the field. These are questions that you ask subject matter experts.
Yeah.
And when someone who intentionally or unintentionally is being presented as a subject matter expert, and they say, in fact, probably more likely so, and ironically in some ways an even stronger thing to hear when you say, I think this is most likely the case, because that's what real experts say about topics.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Even if it's like mathematical or, analytical or something, like I think even here, but especially in the humanities, Kipp is not going to say about a Dead Sea Scrolls fragment, this is absolutely the case,
mm-hmm.
right? When he's asked a question about the state of the field or something like that is going to be in a very specific context. If it's something that is still in some ways contentious, even in the details, which is so much, he's probably going to say, when asked in that context, I think this is most likely the case, or this is almost certainly the case. Right? That language of hedging is part of what it means, I think, to be a subject matter expert, because they recognize that there's always more data out there to wrestle with.
For definite, yeah.
I think that was part of the issue for me in all of this, is that when he's making these statements, where I think it's most likely the case. Well, it doesn't matter what you think is most likely the case, because you are ill-equipped to judge that data.
Yeah.
Just to really make sure that point lands, the problem is that he is presented as an expert when he's not. He gets on stage and he becomes this authoritative figure. And so when he makes these statements that sound exactly like, as you just emphasized, exactly how scholars speak. They don't speak definitively about these things because you can't speak definitively about these things. Rather, you can only go, this is, most likely the case in many situations. And when someone does that and they are presented, regardless of if they are, they're presented as if they are an expert in that field. The issue is that comes across a lot different compared to just, your mate down the pub having a drink and going, I think it's this. Like, that's disingenuous, in my opinion, from Michael and David not to see the problem here.
If I could just give one quick example that happened. It wasn't recent. It was recent for me because I saw the video somewhat recently. It was back in March, I think, of 2024. But Michael gave a presentation at some conference. I don't know. I didn't watch the whole video, sorry. But I did watch this section, which is what's relevant here. He's giving a presentation in front of a large group of people, and he's talking about some of the comparative data that people talk about when they talk about sort of like precursors, maybe, to the stories about Jesus. Mm-hmm. And what comes up is the story of Inanna's descent, the myth of Inanna's descent, which is a Sumerian text, right, from the early 2nd millennium. I don't know this to be the case, but I'm reasonably certain that Michael doesn't know Sumerian. And, sorry, that was meant to be humorous. There aren't many that do, right? Who has that psychosis? Yeah, I think Michael would tell you he doesn't know Sumerian. And one of the things that he said in that presentation, he makes the statement that people have misunderstood or misread this text. And I don't know how he would know that.
Yeah.
I do.
Right.
No, seriously, he's read it on some apologetics website, and that's his source.
I mean, it's understanding a Sumerian mythological text. I'm sorry, like that's not an easy thing to do. For me, that's not an easy thing to do, and it's my field. So, but the way that he said it, it came across to me in this same way, this same pattern of an authoritative statement that people have misread this Sumerian text. And it is a modus operandi. He does it in philosophy as well. He makes statements as if all philosophers have a certain view that they don't. It's what he does. It's just normal. It's exactly what Frank Turek does. It's very common among apologists. It's sad to see. But we're poisoning the well, so shall we move on?
So first of all, with the old version, first of all, I was relying a lot on people I was told were experts. Then I found out they really weren't.
Can we pause it there? This was precisely what I was saying. This was the entire reason that I brought this up. It is incredibly difficult for anyone who doesn't have extensive training in the field to know on whom they should rely for information. This is why we push for interested non-specialists to at least begin with the consensus positions in the field. The fact that Michael built his initial case on scholars that, as he says, turned out not to be experts demonstrates exactly what I was trying to say. And Michael's no different from me, from Kipp, from Falk, or anyone else in this way. Gaining expertise in a particular field includes learning who the experts are. We all have to do it.
Yeah. It's probably worth pointing out here that this person whom Michael is referring to, I think, is probably David Falk, that set him straight on who he should be listening to in the field.
Yes, I think he even mentions Falk in just a second.
Given some of the things that David Falk has promoted already just in this video, stuff about the Amalekites, stuff about the Amorites, are we sure, how sure is Michael that his source of information for, deciding who he should and should not be listening to among Egyptologists or among scholars working on the Exodus texts? How confident should he be that he's now getting good information?
I've in the past had situations where I've made mistakes that are actually quite similar to what Michael made here. And this is what I did, and this is what you would expect from someone in this situation. When he says I was relying a lot on people who were, I was told were experts, what this reveals is that your methodology is shit. It's very bad, because you should have figured that out quite quick. You can figure that out with a cursory look. And so what that did for me is it made me go all the way back to the drawing board and figure out what was going on. Okay, it was financial pressures. I needed to make content. That's why I made that mistake. I have to fix that issue. I said, sorry, fair enough. Let's go forward from there. That's what you would expect. Whereas, as you were just mentioning, he has immediately shifted to what Dr. Falk has to say. So he's switched from one uncritical acceptance to another. And as you just emphasized, to one that has actually a proven track record of being, shall we say, problematic. For me, there is more issues with what he's about to say. I will get those on the table shortly. But is there anything else that either of you have to say before we play that part?
No, we should probably go.
All right, suffer.
Then I found out they really weren't. So I immediately changed my view when I realized, when I was shown directly by Dr. Falk in Manfred B-Tech's reports, where they were getting things wrong. The other thing is that this is just creating more tribalism, Josh. You're basically poisoning the well over people changing their views. Anytime someone changes their view, I applaud them, especially if they're changing it away from something fringe and crazy.
I applaud them because we want to see more of that. We don't want people to be scolded or their motive need to be questioned or their character needs to be questioned because they change their views on things. That's going to cause people on both sides to dig their heels in because they don't want to be dragged through the mud like what you're trying to do here. Is that what you want?
No.
Yeah, Josh, dragging him through the mud.
No, like obviously not. And given the fact that there was confusion here, I put out a tweet clarifying what I was saying. Here's what I wrote. Given recent conversations, let me be clear. I am very much in favor of people changing their minds when presented with evidence that shows their prior position to be problematic. This wasn't my point at all. As I stated in the video, quote, I think the point here is that when you are not a subject matter expert in a particular topic, one must be very careful in, 1, choosing on whom you rely for your information, and 2, making definitive claims about the data, especially when the conclusions you draw go against the consensus of subject matter experts, end quote. My issue was not with one changing their mind. I think that's a wonderful thing. Instead, I was pointing out that if you are not an expert or specialist in the field, it can be difficult to determine on whom you can rely. And being cautious is very wise.
I don't really understand how he misses that, if I'm honest.
Listen, I kind of have a problem with this too, though. What did Michael change his mind about? He changed his mind about an apologetic to defend against what the vast majority of critical scholars are saying about the end of the Bronze Age and the early Iron Age and the things taking place in the Levant, right? What I see is him leading from his conclusion still, recognizing that his arguments leading from his conclusion are not as good as some of these other arguments that are still leading from his conclusion. And I continue to think that this is just sidestepping actually dealing with the problems of a large-scale exodus in the late Bronze, early Iron Age. He's still wrong about all this stuff. Regardless of how much he changes his mind, it still seems pretty clear to me that it was to reach this predetermined goal of ensuring that he maintains the historicity of the Exodus. And that's still the wrong way of going about doing this.
Yeah, I mean, so going to pick apart some of the language and some of the way that he expressed himself there and reiterate some of the points that you both raised. And that is that when he said I was relying on a lot on people I was told are experts, this really captures what you were just saying there, Kipp, in that he's admitting to poor methodology and not verifying sources. I know we've already said it, but like this is what's going on. It tells you about the modus operandi. It's about getting to your conclusion. And so you find an expert that has your view, and that's it. You don't do any more research. And then you go on stage as an authority yourself, or, and you start spewing this stuff. Then he says, I've immediately changed my view when shown directly by Dr. Falk. One, well, it just happens to be a view that also allows him to kind of keep his narrative. So, there's not really a big pushback there, not really a big loss. And again, he switched from one uncritical acceptance to another. He also said about you, Josh, creating tribalism. To me, this is deflecting criticism because it's recasting it as an attack on him changing his views. So rather than having to deal with the substance of your criticism, he can deflect it by saying you're attacking me, you're being tribalistic. I don't know why so many Christian viewers don't see through these kinds of moves, these dialectical moves, but it does frustrate me because there's just no responsibility being taken. It's rather, you're a bad man for attacking me, you're tribalistic.
This is something that actually I noticed today when I was reading back through, the notes that we have. So many times in this script or in these notes, Kipp and I have said, that's a fair criticism.
Yeah.
That's a fair point. Yes, that I can see how it sounded that way. And it was so interesting to me because I don't remember which video it was. Sorry. But one of the responses that they did to us, David said, I was where I had 12 hours to prepare, something. We were doing this very quickly. And so, so I make a little, and they focus on the little, and it's like, Just say you were wrong.
Yeah, just say you're wrong. It's not that hard. It's fine.
Yeah. Messed that one up. Yeah. Damn. I got that wrong.
Maybe you should take your time doing some of this stuff. I don't know.
Maybe take 9 hours. Okay,
9 hours is what you want to take.
Yes.
I'll tell you what, you want to talk about 9 hours to the people watching? You should see the notes that Josh and Kipp write for these kinds of episodes.
Listen,
My goodness, the hours.
Josh and I prepared much longer for this than it took for him to grow that fabulous beard of his.
Absolutely.
A lot longer. So
One day, Kipp, I'll be able to sit back and go,
That's it. I think you can do it right now, if I'm honest with you. I mean, if I can do it, you can do it.
Absolutely works.
This is good stuff.
There's an important message here. I get it. This is part of the pressure of churning out content. Requires that you're kind of on this time crunch, right? So that's probably why I don't do nearly as much as I feel like I should online, because it takes me hella long to prepare for a stream or to put together a video or, to do something like this. Like, we have been working on this for months.
Absolutely.
It's been months that we've been doing this. And one of the reasons why is because when it comes to the data, there's so much, and we want to be careful. We want to be as thorough as we can be, and that just takes time. So maybe David, maybe Michael, take a step back, spend some time, do some work, prepare yourself, and that's a good way to avoid making like dumb mistakes.
publish that article on the Luca,
Yeah, let's have it. We want to see it.
Get it out there. Let's see it.
So a few other criticisms I have of what he had to say there is, he said, quote, poisoning the well over people changing their views. This is something you touched upon. That wasn't your criticism. But again, it's the second misuse of poisoning the well. That's not what it is, Michael. Like, what are you doing? And also, again, it's deflection. It means you don't have to actually deal with the criticism. It's Josh being a bad man, which you do have the beard for now. He also used the words dragged
to
through
cock
the
you
mud.
fallacy.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Well, that's just dragging David through the mud, which is, the other words that Michael emphasized. It's emotional language that frames, scholarly criticism as a personal attack. He also said, is that what you want? Is that what you want to be doing? It's a rhetorical question that attempts to make Josh look like an absolute giga arsehole. Which you are. You don't need it for him to be adding all of this language and stuff. He could just roll with what you actually said. But no, it's there's just so much performative stuff. It reminds me of what you said in one of the previous episodes about it being a WWE spectacle. That is exactly what I think is going on in these situations. And I think some of the mistakes that a lot of scholars make is they mistake the frontal view, which looks academic, for that being what's going to happen when it's not. I know I'm showing my cards, but it's not like I hide them. I don't like apologetics. All right, so next clip, unless you guys have anything else to say.
Well, let's continue.
Well, this is something that occurs a lot in the academy, too. Okay?
Yeah.
So, you do see this a lot in sort of academic discourse where you get this, how dare you change your mind? How dare you follow the evidence? Because now we can't hold you to it. And a lot of academics will gripe over other academics that will update their views. This is something that you do see. But it's also the intellectually honest approach. Intellectually honest people look at the data, if it's new data, and say, hey, okay, this is new. I hadn't considered this before. I need to update my views.
Yeah.
That's just being intellectually honest. But it does rub academics the wrong way, because then you can't go back 50 years and say, look, see, 50 years ago he said this.
Yeah, and it's just like, this will just create tribalism and stubbornness, because if you're going to get dragged through the mud for changing your view, people aren't going to want to change their views.
And a lot of academics don't because of it.
Kipp, has that been your experience in academia?
I want to make sure I'm hearing this correctly. Is David Falk suggesting that large swaths of academics are just operating in intellectual dishonesty?
Yeah, what the
Am
hell?
I hearing that correctly?
Yes, you're hearing that correctly. Where citation needed? Like, what the fuck?
Who is doing this? I've been in the academy for a long time. I'll admit it. I have a problem. I've watched a little bit of David Falk's content.
Oh gosh,
or a lot.
Admitting you have a problem is the first step to recovery.
That's the first step.
Audience, can you just please send prayers and money to Kipp? That'd be good. That'd be awesome.
Please send me money.
Get a new camera.
Prayers are fine, but if you can send money, yeah, I'll take it. But this is something that I have observed. It feels like David has had not a great experience in the academy. He complains a lot about how things work. He has spoken on occasions about institution and departmental politics in such a way that feels, quite frankly, draconian. Like, it really does. It's pretty dark. I've been in the academy a long time. I don't know, maybe I'm an affable person. I'm a pretty optimistic person. I'm generally a pretty cheery guy. I gotta say, the vast majority of academics that I've interacted with, and I've interacted with a lot on multiple continents in several different countries. I have ongoing, active, excellent scholarly networks, engaged with all the time. And the people are terrific. And all they want is to make a strong contribution to the field and to do their best. Like that's all we're doing. That's all any of us. I'm sure there's rotten, and I have met a few. There are some rotten academics out there, but most of us are just trying to do our jobs, quite honestly. And listen, when it comes to publishing, when it comes to delivering papers, this is something that you constantly have to bear in mind. On the one hand, yes, you do need to be very keenly aware of the history of scholarship, of the history of research, of those who have gone before you. But unless you've got something new to say, no one is going to listen to you.
Well, this reminds me, you guys might remember the actual saying, but if you meet someone and they're an asshole, they might be an asshole. But if everyone you meet is an asshole,
yes, yeah.
You're the asshole, right? And, again, I don't know that to be the case, but if everywhere you go in academia, you're getting a bad taste in your mouth, I don't know. Like I would ask the question, if it were me, is it what I'm putting in? Yeah.
You could phrase it this way. Like this might be helpful if someone's still thinking that for some reason, these academics in the ivory towers are all mean with thunder in the background. The statistical likelihood of this being the case is just none. It's just none. It's not a proposition worth even considering. Like, these are people that are dedicated. Most of them are really nerdy, right? No offense.
Yeah.
They're into their comics. They're into their field. That's what they do. They're nice people. Like, they just get passionate about their projects. They're not a cabal. They're not together trying to eliminate like new thinking or anything like that. Otherwise, these fields would be static, and they're not, because you can come up with new things. So when David comes on in and, he says it occurs a lot in the academy, which is making a sweeping claim about academic behavior without evidence. When he says, how dare you change your mind? He's just creating this, frankly, such a stupid caricature of academic institutions that you can only buy this if you're not questioning the narrative whatsoever. I don't know what else to say to you, really, if you're someone that buys this. This just is nonsense.
It's not coincidental that this is the kind of criticism that is coming from the outside.
Yep.
I can't help but think that this is exactly the same thing that I hear from famous mythicist Richard Carrier when it comes to talking about scholars of the historical Jesus, scholars of the New Testament, historians of the Greco-Roman world who just won't see things his way, it can't be because his ideas are shit. That can't be it. It must be because there's some sort of operative agenda at work that is preventing them from seeing the truth. And, you know, those on the outside who struggle to make a dent or make an impression or gain a foothold in institutions, in academics, are likely going to see this through conspiratorial eyes. I think that's it. That's just what he's doing here.
Yeah.
It can't be me. It's got to be everyone else.
A couple of other things to emphasize is that he said it's the intellectually honest approach, which implies that his critics are being intellectually dishonest, is another deflection. He said can't go back 50 years, which is creating a straw man of the entire circumstance and what's going on. And he said that a lot of academics don't change their minds because of this, which is Falk making another unsupported claim to reinforce the narrative that they're running here. It's a narrative where Michael is being painted as as someone that's being very much prosecuted almost. Mm-hmm. And that's very common in apologetics. And also the demonization of the establishment, the demonization of academia is bread and butter apologetics. And it's because the more you study these things, the less you tend to buy, especially literal interpretations. And so what they want to do is either outright accuse the establishment of being corrupt, which is what this narrative is feeding into, or that's it actually, it's just corruption. That is the narrative, that's what they're aiming for. And whether or not it's intended with the way that they're speaking here, that is exactly the narrative that they're pushing again. It's so unlikely on its face.
All right, let's keep going here. I got a little bit more of this section laid out. So I think we're going to get more into some of their arguments.
To that end, let me quote from Nava Panitz Cohen, an archaeologist who specializes in the material culture of the Late Bronze Age. Quote, the end of the Amarna interlude was followed by a much tightened control of Canaan by the rulers of the 19th dynasty, covering all of the 13th century BCE. This phase, Late Bronze 2b, began with the military campaigns of Seti I in 1295 and was dominated by the long-lived Ramesses II from 1279 to 1212. She writes more specifically, quote, the reign of the 19th dynasty marked an unprecedented intensification of Egyptian presence in Canaan, well attested in Egyptian sources by a step-up in punitive military campaigns, and in the archaeological record by the governor's residencies and garrison stations established at strategic locations. This...
All right.
Okay.
What do you want to say?
They just lectured us on consulting subject matter experts for the sources. Okay? Cohen is a Syro-Palestinian archaeologist. She's not an Egyptologist.
Mm-hmm.
Shouldn't they be quoting archaeologists for about Egyptian campaigns and hegemony?
Well, you're here.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we would expect. If that's what you're going to if that's your sort of shtick, that we only quote the subject matter specialist experts, why are you quoting a Syro-Palestinian archaeologist on this? Not her field of expertise.
Okay. I'm sorry. This might be one of my favorites just because of how stupid it is. It really is. Josh has lots of good things to say about this, but I'm going to marinate a little bit in this world in which there are archaeologists of Egyptian hegemony. Like, what does that even look like? Who is that? Just listen, for anybody who doesn't know how this works, it's actually pretty simple. Archaeologists very generally tend to specialize on the basis of two factors. Okay, location, the area in which they happen to dig and to work, and period, the era in which they are most closely acquainted with. So basically what that means is so long as whatever is happening is taking place in the area where Nama Panitz Cohen digs and does her work, that's her field, my guy. That's it. Maybe she is an archaeologist of Egyptian hegemony. Maybe she is.
It's moments like these that I'm glad that I typed out what I was going to say, because I feel far more articulate when I can sit down and think about how I want to word this. So here we go. I feel like my writing is even kinder than I am.
It's a high mark.
This is an odd critique, in my opinion. First, Panitz Cohen's bio. She earned her PhD in archaeology from Hebrew University in Jerusalem and has excavated over the last 2 decades at sites like Tel Batash, Tel Beit Sha'an, Tel Rehov, and Tel Beit Ma'akah. She focuses much of her work on ceramics from the Bronze and Iron Ages. When I cited her, I was responding to Michael's statement that there is, quote, overwhelming evidence for an exodus and a conquest in the 13th century BC. The source for my quotation was her contribution on the archaeology of the late Bronze Age in Cisjordan. The quote comes from the historical and chronological framing section of her chapter, but the ideas stated there more generally are developed again later in the article. Concerning Egyptian control, for example, she writes, quote, the reign of the 19th dynasty marked an unprecedented intensification of Egyptian presence in Canaan, well attested in Egyptian sources by a step up in punitive military campaigns and in the archaeological record by the governor's residences and garrison stations established at strategic locations, and she lists them out. Temples dedicated to Egyptian deities, and an increase in Egyptian and Egyptianized objects, inscriptions, and burial customs in the form of anthropoid coffins. Egyptian involvement in local craft production is evident, particularly in pottery manufacture, end quote. That's on page 548. Clearly, Panitz Cohen's statements about increased Egyptian involvement and control during this period are not strictly dependent upon Egyptian textual sources. And I don't think there is any issue whatsoever in citing her general statements concerning the history of Egypt and Canaan during this period, as her comments are well within the mainstream of scholarship. I think that if she were presenting an argument that represented a minority position, and such a position was based solely on Egyptian source material, either textual or archaeological data from Egypt itself, then their critique would hold greater sway with me. That being said, I would not have cited her in such case, so it is moot. However, if David would like me to cite an Egyptologist, so be it. Daphne Ben-Tor, who has written extensively on scarabs and seal impressions from the Middle and Late Bronze Ages, said in a contribution to the edited volume Egypt, Canaan, and Israel, History, Imperialism, Ideology, and Literature, entitled, quote, Egyptian-Canaanite Relations in the Middle and Late Bronze Ages as Reflected by Scarabs, the following, concerning Egyptian interactions with Canaan during the Ramesside period. Quote, the second millennium BCE saw 2 crucial developments occurring respectively in the Middle and Late Bronze Ages. The first is a gradual infiltration and settlement of Canaanites in the Eastern Delta, which resulted in the presence of a highly Egyptianized Canaanite Middle Bronze culture in this region, and the rule of a dynasty of Canaanite origin in northern Egypt. The second is a long-lasting Egyptian empire in Canaan with military and administrative presence. In her conclusion, she writes, quote, the corpus of 18th dynasty scarabs found in Palestine is much smaller than that of the Middle Bronze Age, but the 19th dynasty saw a significant increase in the number of imported scarabs, especially during the reign of Ramses II. Considering the archaeological evidence, it is reasonable to assume that this increase in the number of scarabs reflected the intensified Egyptian presence in Palestine in the face of the growing power of the Egyptian Empire, Hittite Empire in the north. She concludes, the material culture of southern Canaan underwent a conspicuous Egyptianization in the Ramesside period, and Egyptian influence increased significantly in comparison with the 18th dynasty.
I wonder how he will dismiss that.
I was in a hurry.
Are we sure that Ben Tor is an Egyptologist of Egyptian hegemony?
Touche. Touche. Very well played, sir.
All right, to bring this to my layperson standard, is essentially what David is saying. It's like saying that a World War II historian that focuses on France can't discuss German occupation because they're not a German historian.
I thought so. I thought so. But yeah, I think that is precisely what he's saying.
Would an Egyptologist not be able to comment on, like the architecture of the Hyksos dynasty because it's Canaanite in origin?
Right.
No, I mean, like, obviously you'd go to an Egyptologist for that. I mean, the Egyptologist is going to know very well the secondary literature and the archaeology. Like, Manfred Bitak, I'm sure, is very up to speed on the four-room house.
The other thing is that, the dominance of Ramses II's control over the Levant is wildly overstated. It's wildly overstated. The fact is that Ramses II reigned 66 years. His last campaign was in his 18th regnal year. It also misrepresents what the function of those garrison towns were. Those garrison towns weren't there to beat down the locals. Most of them were fairly small, between 250 and 1,000 people. Now, half of that cohort would be military people, and half of that again would be chariots. So in some garrison towns, you had as few as 50 chariots. That's not enough to control a region. Okay, the three functions of the garrison towns were to collect tribute, to be a monitoring station, and to be a rest drop for the king when he goes on campaign. That's the three functions of garrison towns. They're really not there to hit, to be the stick. They're the eyes of the pharaoh.
Making this distinction between being the stick, is that what he said?
Yeah.
And, enforcing taxation, tribute, and, providing services for the king on campaign. What does that have to do with anything? Am I missing something? I don't see how that's relevant. And I might be misremembering. And Josh, maybe, right, it's Josh. So, this is going to be no help at all when it comes to recall. But
shut up.
We talked to New Kingdom specialist Maggie Bryson a few months ago. And I seem to remember that she made this precise point, that what do you need to exercise regional control? 50 chariots? Seems plenty.
Well, for starters, you give me 50 chariots and I'll do a lot of damage, particularly if my neighbors don't have them. Falk was saying, right, the only reason they have these garrison towns is because they want to collect tribute. Well, what could possibly be more important than collecting your money?
And honestly, I don't know, but I'm also suspicious at how well David knows this stuff either.
So I'm not sure of the argument here. First, I don't think that anyone is arguing that massive military forces were being stationed throughout Canaan during this period.
Yeah.
And such forces would certainly not be necessary in order to maintain control of the region. And that historians have concluded that Egyptian administrative and military presence greatly increased during this period is the standard position. In his History of Egypt, historian Van de Meerup writes, Egypt's administration of its Syro-Palestinian territories had been relatively loose during the 18th dynasty. Local vassals were responsible for carrying out imperial orders, and only a few Egyptian administrators were involved. After the conquest phase, Egyptian military presence was also limited. That system ended in the Ramessid period. Instead, the Egyptians intensified their presence in the region, building officials' residences and military garrisons, and transforming strategically located towns into fortresses. The amount of Egyptian remains increased dramatically, with more architecture, including temples to Egyptian deities, royal and private statuary, steles, inscriptions, and pottery. It also seems that local people accepted Egyptian cultural influence more readily, and in archaeological remains, the local traditions grow fainter. The strengthened presence suggests that the Egyptians annexed the region and occupied it militarily. It limited itself to Palestine, and southern Syria seems to have been left alone, end quote. And Ann Killebrew writes, after engaging with all of the textual and archaeological data, quote, during the 13th century BCE, Egypt experienced a period of prosperity and stability under Ramses II. Despite the probable loss of territory in Syria to Hatti after the Battle of Kadesh, Egypt's control over Canaan solidified, with clear signs of Egyptian presence at a number of sites in Canaan. Egyptian military activities in Canaan appear to have been renewed under Merneptah. And take note of Anne Killebrew's, albeit lengthy, quote from her 2017 contribution to Finkelstein's Festschrift. Quote, the impact of Egyptian campaigns to Canaan and Egypt's policy of forced migration of its captured population are discernible in the archaeological record. Beginning with the expulsion of the Hyksos and the consolidation of Egyptian power marked by the establishment of the New Kingdom circa 1550 BCE, numerous Canaanite city-states experienced destruction and a depletion of their population. In contrast to the preceding Middle Bronze Age, Late Bronze Canaan is characterized by smaller settlements and a more diverse and less integrated socioeconomic and political system. And then in parentheses, going to 1984 regarding settlement patterns and surprise, surprise, Panitz-Cohen 2013 for a recent overview of Late Bronze Age Canaan and detailed bibliography. Weird. Anne Killebrew citing Panitz-Cohen's article, the very one that I cited, in a section specifically about Egypt's control over Canaan during the Late Bronze Age.
If only anyone knew a specialist in Egyptian hegemony. If only.
If only.
Where are they?
Her quote continues, the economic and human resources of the southern Levant are depleted further by regular military campaigns to the region, the erection of Egyptian residencies and fortresses at several strategically located sites in Canaan, such as Beit Sha'an, Afek, Tel Mor, and Der el-Balach, and Egypt's implementation of formal administrative imperialism during the 13th and first half of the 12th centuries. Coinciding with a more visible Egyptian presence, she continues, destruction spanning more than half a century marked the end of the Late Bronze Age, most notably the mid-13th century conflagration at Hatzor and the abandonment of this 800-dönum city for nearly 2 centuries. Egyptian domination in Canaan steadily weakened during the reign of Ramses III, paralleling increased internal strife and economic decline in Egypt itself. And then she lists recent overviews. Sorry, I felt personally attacked on this one. So I'm just like bringing them all out. Or how about James Weinstein?
The beard,
Weinstein.
guys. It's the beard.
In his contribution to the Klein O'Connor edited volume on Ramses III, quote, the pharaohs of the early 18th dynasty, late 16th, early 15th centuries, carved out an empire that reached as far north as the Euphrates River in Syria. Over the next several centuries, Egypt governed Syria-Palestine by means of a loose colonial administration that was managed through one or more regional headquarters and included the retention of local vassal princes. The principal headquarters during most of the New Kingdom was at Gaza in southwestern Palestine. Administrators stationed at regional headquarters, supplemented by circuit officials and tax collectors, and supported military by small garrisons of Egyptian troops and later on by increasing numbers of foreign mercenaries, at these and other strategic points comprised the bulk of the personnel who ran the empire for the pharaoh on a day-to-day basis. When so required, the king could dispatch more substantial military forces, which he sometimes personally led, from Egypt to put down rebellions in Canaanite towns, bring troublesome non-urban groups under control, or confront any of the great powers of the Near East, Mitanni initially, Hatti later on, that might challenge Egyptian authority in the Levant. This colonial enterprise fluctuated in strength and geographical extent over a period of some 400 years, but it generally functioned rather well until the end of the reign of Ramses II, when much of Syria slipped out of Egypt's hands following the Battle of Kadesh against the Hittites in the king's 5th regnal year. After that clash, Egyptian authority gradually receded until it encompassed primarily the southern Levant and the Phoenician coast. Within Palestine, the 19th dynasty pharaohs found it necessary to expand the number of garrisons and reinforce already existing strongholds. Those actions, combined with the suppression of occasional small-scale revolts in the reigns of Seti I, Ramses II, and Merneptah, sufficed to keep the area in Egyptian hands until political instability in Egypt and perhaps the movement of new peoples into Palestine at the end of the 13th and beginning of the 12th centuries contributed to a loss of Egyptian hegemony over substantial parts of the highlands and fringe areas of the southern Levant and possibly also Phoenicia. I swear I'm almost done. Last sentence. The early 20th dynasty opened with Egyptian rule, focusing on lowland Palestine to exploit its resources and protect Egypt's imperial interest against any hostile challenges. So, suck it.
But he said it so confidently.
I think this is a guy that Michael and David would both like. Rutgers Professor Gary Rensburg has opted for a 12th century Exodus precisely because of ongoing Egyptian control all the way into the 20th dynasty. In this book that Michael really likes, the 5 Views book on the Exodus, he publishes an essay in which he talks about this. And this is what he says. Gary Rensburg says, historical documentation clearly reveals an ongoing Egyptian presence in the land of Canaan during the reign of Ramses III. Egyptian officials were stationed at Gaza and Deir el-Balach in the southern coastal plain, at Lachish, Tel Sarah, perhaps Ziklag, Tel el-Farah, south, and perhaps Bet Shemesh in the southern inland area, in addition to centers near the coast such as Gaza and Deir el-Balach, and at Megiddo, and most prominently Bet Shean in the north. In addition, Egyptian mining in the Timna Valley continued throughout the 19th dynasty and into the reign of Ramses III during the 20th dynasty, though perhaps with brief interruption during the transition between the 2 dynasties. So that's from the 5 Views book. Amahai Mazar, who Josh and I had the pleasure to interview a couple of months ago, has characterized the Egyptian presence in Canaan as domination during the 19th and the 20th dynasties, albeit considerably weakened after the reign of Meneptah. And that's from 1250 to 850 BC. He marks the end of the 20th dynasty after Ramses III as, quote, the end of the Egyptian presence in Canaan, end quote. So the point is that Falk's attempt to downplay Egyptian control in Canaan during the reign of Ramses II is just not clearly reflected in the sources nor in the material culture. Mm-hmm. It's telling, right? Like, they have to do this. You have to downplay the Egyptian presence in Canaan in order to make any sort of conquest model work. Unless you're going to, dramatically shift the data that, as like people like Rensburg or more recently now Steiner has felt necessary to do, right? The reason for this has a lot to do with the archaeological picture in the Levant and with how problematic it is given Egypt's presence there. The
source that you mentioned, he uses that, and yet in that source it says that the Egyptian presence was still there during Ramesses III's reign, whereas here they're needing it to be during Ramesses II, that the Egyptians are much, much weaker, and that it's, their control over the Levant is wildly overstated. Is that fair? Have I got that right?
Yeah, so the case that David has made in a few places, the argument that he's put forward is that after the Battle of Kadesh, Ramses was basically just pushed all the way back to Egypt and kind of restricted there, and that is, that was sort of the dramatic reduction in Egypt's presence in Canaan. Shoot, what is the date for the Battle of Kadesh, Josh? It's but it's basically it's like 100 years.
1275, I think.
Really, yeah. So it's like 100 years before sort of the end of the reign of Ramses III.
Got you.
Which is really where most scholars would start to say this is where it's at this point that we really see a reduction in control of Egypt and importantly, we're not talking about the whole Levant here, right? We're talking about the Israelite conquest is centered in the southern Levant. There's campaigns in the north, but for the most part, it's what we would consider to be the southern Levant. And Egyptian control there remained, as Josh pointed out in, the sources he was citing.
Yep, cool.
It's particularly in this region that Egyptian control remained strong, even if it was diminishing more the farther north you get, the closer you get to the Hittite and the Mitanni kingdoms.
So to reiterate some of what's been said, but also to add a few things in, with the way that he was speaking here, he was implying that military campaigns are the only measure for regional control. And that's just not the case, as has been emphasized. And he contradicts himself, at least by my lights, when he's talking about the garrison towns, because he claims that they weren't for control. He said beat down the locals, they weren't for that, but then lists their functions, including collecting tribute and being a monitoring station. He doesn't seem to recognize that the collection of tribute inherently requires power to enforce it. It's just in his sentence like a straight contradiction. He focuses on raw numbers, so he says 50 chariots, ignoring the strategic placement and the deterrent effect. And so, like, when the Romans were, say, in England, and they were busy elsewhere. They had conquered England, and so, like, they're busy elsewhere. They didn't need to leave many people in control.
Yeah.
That's not how that worked. You didn't need to keep a full army there. You could do it with almost no force at all, because as long as they knew that the Romans would turn up, a couple of legions will be sent. That's all that was needed once they had the power. And it surprises me that either David doesn't know this, and I would have thought he would, considering his historical background, or that he's not recognizing that. I don't know. It's really strange for me to, like, look in from an outsider and go, I don't understand why he would bring up the 50 chariots and, you know, make out that that you need like a full army here. It's very bizarre by my lights.
It doesn't seem like Egypt, and we've talked about this before, had like this super strong empire in Canaan. The Hittites are also pushing them further south through this period. It's not like they had control of all of Canaan throughout the 13th century. Is that correct?
No. That is correct. In fact, they start losing it by the 5th year of Ramses II. Ramses II, in his Kaddish inscriptions, already notes that the Philistines, the sea peoples, are coming into the coastal plain.
Mm-hmm.
So if they're already coming into the coastal plain, they're already losing it.
Are they, though? Importantly, listen to what they said there, right? Ramses is being pushed farther south into the southern Levant. Kadesh is way the hell up in the north, right? Compared to where Palestine is. And as we noted before, right? As much as Ramses' control in the north was being affected by the activities of the Hittites, Egyptian control in the south continued to be status quo. Steady as she goes. Yeah,
like this part here struck me a little bit like saying that like the raid on Lindisfarne meant that the Kingdom of Wessex was losing it. No. Like that comes a lot later that there's even an interaction there. And it's like, I don't know if that's a fair analogy, but that's how it comes across to me at least.
Yeah.
And then you've got Michael saying super strong empire, which in my opinion creates a straw man about what control means. Like, it doesn't have to be that strong. I wonder that, like, does David and Michael, when they think about, for instance, the influence that the US has in other regions, do they think that that influence only counts if the US military is actually on that land? Does it only count if it's like a set amount of tanks or something? I just don't understand what the mentality is here. Like, this doesn't even require, like, a level of abstraction, really. Like, it's just, this is the way that power works.
You're right about that. I think that's it.
The other thing to be said is that when he says that they're already losing it, doesn't this like imply a binary control rather than degrees of influence? That's my main take on that, at least. So yeah, he's creating a false dichotomy between total control and no control. He's oversimplifying how imperial power works. He's misrepresenting the timeline of Egyptian influence, and he's ignoring how empires can maintain significant control even while facing challenges. Again, another analogy is like saying the British Empire wasn't powerful in India because it faced some regional rebellions. It's just, it doesn't work like this.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair.
Baruch Halpern even says before Ramesses III, this was happening.
Oh, yeah.
That Egypt no longer it was in a condition to project power beyond its borders, even before Ramesses III. So into the, I would guess, would assume into the 1300s, that is. No, sorry, 1200s.
We start seeing this as early as the Amarna period. That's when we see this, the earliest we see this. In fact, there's one Amarna letter where it talks about a raid of sea peoples into the coastal plain.
I'm not sure where Falk is getting this from. There are a handful of references in the Amarna letters to various groups of mercenaries from Crete that may be identified with the Sea Peoples. EA38 mentions what looks like raids by the, wouldn't you know it, the Luca. Maybe that's who he's talking about. Right? Is it possible he's talking about the Luca here, who are also later included among the Sea People in Karnak inscriptions? There are occasional references to the men of Arwad and the Mishi in maritime skirmishes along the Phoenician coast. J.P. Emanuel has written an article about this called Sea Raiders in the Amarna Letters, the men of Arwad and the Mishi in context. But importantly, none of these are with references to incidents in the coastal plain, nor do they occur as part of a sustained invasion like what happened during the reigns of Merneptah or Ramesses III, which is the time when scholars tend to think of the invasion of the Sea People. Like, this is the time when they started to arrive in force and affect the actual control of the coastal region. And that happens quite a bit later.
So could do with more citations from
maybe a few.
From David then.
Yeah.
The two takeaways that I got, well, I got lots more, but the big ones was Michael said there, I guess one would assume. It's a small note, but like to me, this reveals the uncertainty that he has while making definitive claims. With David, he's saying that's when we see this. And so what he's doing is treating an isolated event as if it's systemic change. And that's all he's presented. Like, as you said, he hasn't given more power behind that claim. All right, so the next clip we're going to be getting to is to do with Orcs. It's a pretty controversial piece from Michael. However, there is a lot more that Michael said that could be touched upon and has been touched upon partly with Apologetic, but also there's lots to do with Jericho. And you guys are going to be teaming up with someone else to take a better look at that elsewhere. So let everyone know where they can find that, because as well as me posting it when you do it, it will be good to send them over there prematurely.
Yeah. And maybe I'll just say something too. We've had a conversation with Israeli archaeologist Amahai Mazar, a very enlightening discussion about the state of Canaan at the end of the Bronze Age and into the beginning of the Iron Age. And we touch a little bit on Jericho in that's going to be coming out shortly. It might even be published by the time this is made available. But in addition to that, both Josh and I are going to be sitting down and having a conversation with Bob Cargill, who is a scholar at University of Iowa. I think it's the University of Iowa, isn't it, Josh? Yeah. So, and this is what we're going to be talking about with him. He's written a book about cities in the Bible, and we're going to be talking to him about David's and Michael's handling, in particular, of the archaeological evidence from Jericho and how scholars in the field, by and large, are dealing with this information. So look for that.
Perfect.
It'll be on my channel.
Yeah, no, I guess what everyone will be asking really is, will it be 9 hours, Kipp? Will it be 9 hours or not?
My beard says yes.
Good. Yeah, no, everyone check out their channels.
It'll be down to the floor by the time we're done that stream.
We're gonna have a full-on Socrates going on, yeah?
Yeah. Let's step out of Josh's and my areas of expertise for a minute here.
But into the real source of Christian apologetics.
Right. Yes.
All right, here's the last clip I want to play, ladies and gentlemen.
I was reading a couple of articles about the ancient Canaanites and just the ancient Near East, because I'm not actually arguing that the ancient Canaanites were 10 billion times worse than everybody else, but right, they were very evil. And when I was studying those things, I had a moment where I pulled back from my computer screen, and the thought that came into my heart was, oh, that's what evil is.
If the Bible is true and the Canaanites were performing infant sacrifices, and you took some of these skeptics back to the ancient world, let's be honest, whose side would you be on? Would you be like, no, Israel, don't come in? I think you'd be joining Israel in this. I mean, let's be honest, these were evil people. Anyone who performs infant sacrifice is an evil person. There's no way around that.
If the Neo-Assyrian royal inscriptions are true,
begging the question much,
right? You know, if these inscriptions are true, if the Middle Assyrian inscriptions are true in the epics, these foreign lands were really rebelling, as they say, against the god Asher. If I were to take Michael and Gavin back, My God, whose side would they be on? lot hanging on if the Bible is true in that scenario.
When the conquest is occurring, right? What do they do with some of the children? Do they kill them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the argument, right? That's a common point made, and it's a useful point made, that you're solving a problem by basically creating the same problem, but on a cosmic scale.
Yeah, it's like...
But even in terms of your question, Stephen, when the conquest happened, right? I think we need to just continually remind people that it didn't happen.
Yep.
The conquest didn't happen, right? This is fiction. This literature is fiction, and it's designed to address a point. My personal and there's a lot of work by scholars, by Hebrew Bible scholars, on what exactly the conquest stories are. Yes, they probably contain some echoes of the tumultuous time that was this transition from the Bronze Age into the Iron Age in southern Canaan. But these memories then are being reconstituted and dramatically rewritten in a form to serve an agenda for people at a much, much later period in Israel's history. And basically the way in which these texts are functioning. And there's, like I said, there's a variety of opinions on when these texts were written and what specific situations they're addressing. But I think it's fair to say most scholars would agree that this literature is a sort of propaganda that's being used to other their opponents, whoever they are. So what invariably ends up happening is, in line with that, a lot of these critiques, like the horror that Gavin is experiencing at how terrible the Canaanites were, is because he's reading these depictions through the eyes of the Hebrew Bible, through the eyes of the writers of this literature, and he's getting that impression because that's what they want you to think.
No, Kipp, see, you don't understand, right? The king of Umma and his people, they were really, really wicked. You don't understand. They went back on their oaths, right? They didn't pay interest that they said they were going to pay. And so, these early dynastic kings of Lagash, they had to go in and fight and kill them. See, but this is the thing, right? Everybody hears that and goes, well, first of all, who the fuck are Umma and Lagash, right? But
that's kind of the point, though,
read a
isn't
book,
it?
people know.
Yeah.
But as Kipp is pointing out, these are propagandistic texts. And this is one of the things that frustrates me. Are we doing an internal critique? Like, if that's all we're doing here, if you're saying to us, look, in order to critique us, you have to adopt our worldview and just believe what we believe, fine. Now we're doing some type of theological argument, and I'm not interested in that. That's not interesting to me.
Yeah.
If you're trying to say, in very focused points, like you have to stay with the internal frame of reference of 1 Samuel 15, I'm with you. Let's do that, right? And you can't say, gosh, the Amalekites were attacked for no reason whatsoever, even though it's a dumbass reason, given what the text says, right? No, not one that we would go with today as any kind of a justification. Centuries earlier, those people attacked our people. So miss me with that shit. But if we're going with the internal frame of reference of the narrative and that's all you want to go with, fine. If that's what you're doing, we're just going to believe what the text says, sure. But that's not what we're doing in this conversation. When you start talking about archaeology, when you start talking about the historical critical application of, these data points, there's this dance.
Yeah.
When it suits, we just trust the Bible. But when we have other data to support it, then we bring that in. And it's very frustrating.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
To do that. Who gives a fuck if the Bible's true to that? Because that's the point under contention, right? In this case.
I see there to be two major problems that they're dealing with. Because you're both, of course, absolutely correct that apologetics, so much of it is defending a genocide that never happened. It's hilarious. That's what this is.
You don't have to do this, guys.
I know. That's the sad thing.
You don't have to.
It's come on. This isn't needed. But if you do it from the historical angle, then, it's just game over. Whereas if you do it from let's just assume it's true. The reason why I think Gavin has to do this, and why a lot of Christians have to do this, is that if you, and just a lot of theists, is that if you assume it to be true, you still have a major fucking problem. And that is that this is obviously, grotesquely immoral. Like, you want to say that right and wrong is written on our heart? Killing babies is wrong. Inherited sin is wrong. We don't act like this in our everyday life because it's wrong. And yet, like, this is imbued into this Bible. It's justified. And this is why, in my opinion, Gavin has to use language like very evil. That's what evil is. He has to demonize this group in order to somehow justify what the narrative tells him happens. You know, another example of him softening an extreme view with a false moderation is that he said, not 10 billion times worse. It's all in service of trying to be able to justify something that is utterly, it just can't be justified, even if the historicity was on its side, which it's not. Again, Michael saying, let's be honest, it's a rhetorical device. It's used to pressure agreement. And all of it creates this false binary, which is you either support genocide or you support evil. And that's just not the case. That's not the dichotomy. There is no dichotomy. Like, you can say both are wrong.
Let me just say one more thing here. There's another layer of crazy in here, right? Because if you set the book of Joshua, these conquest narratives, as early as the 7th century in the reforms of Josiah, then this is a polemic most likely against people living north of the city of Jerusalem. And the fucked up thing about that is that these are Israelites, right? For all intents and purposes, insofar as our modern conventional understanding of this, as far as an evangelical or an apologetic understanding of this, the people that Josiah or Joshua is othering in this literature are the same people. They're the same. And it's the same thing too if you set this literature later in like the Persian period, or at the times of, I think some people talk about it as being prompted in view of some of the return, or the way these return narratives were sort of being propagated during the Persian period. If you're going to put it there, exactly the same thing is happening. It's still a small group, a smaller group of people disenfranchising and attempting to other a larger group of people who are just like them. I don't think we can understress that the crazy thing in all of this is that whoever the text is identifying as Canaanites, in reality, these were probably Israelites.
Would you say like it would have been as similar as, say, Northumbria and Wessex in England? Or would you say even more so? It's even more tight.
If I knew anything about Northumbria and
it's like, I mean, you know, probably, but maybe not.
But listen, Stephen, I guarantee you, if you asked that question of Dr. David Falk, he would have an answer for you.
He would talk for 9 hours.
Hey, that's it. That's true. On the spot. Damn, yeah, you know, you're right.
Now we're just being mean, guys.
Hey, you know the rules. If you're going to be mean to me, I'm going to be mean to you.
Right.
As I said in the beginning, if you're not going to be nice to me, I'm not going to be nice to you. So tonight, we are using Kipp Davis rules.
There's no way around that. And that's just the beginning of it. I mean, they also did temple prostitution. They would raid, you know, this is just the ancient world. They would raid and attack.
Now, see, sorry. Do you hear it? Sorry, I'm shutting up after this. But do you hear the mixing? If you buy the narrative, if it's true, and then immediately, that's just the ancient world. Stick with one. We're either going with the narrative and the internal frame of reference, or we're going with historical critical data. Stop floating in between each one, or in between the two of them.
Absolutely.
You know, this is just the ancient world. They would raid and attack, and then they'd kill all the men, bring the women and children back as slaves to use for whatever purposes. We're talking about orcs here. That's human nature. It's like the orcs of Middle Earth. Do you really think that God does not have a right to judge that?
Wow. That's a lot. Humans are orcs. The Canaanites were so irredeemably detestable that they were just like orcs. And
Notice I said earlier in that interview that this is an analogy, and if you're going to look at the races of Middle Earth, which would humans most be like? So let's keep that in context, Kipp.
Deserving of extermination for it. Do you see what's going on here? Tolkien invented the orcs as a fantasy trope designed to sharpen the boundaries in the epic cosmic conflict he imagined between good and evil. The orcs are not people. They're monsters,
Jeez.
not by birth. They're extracted from the bowels of the earth. They're craven, barely intelligible, repulsive, black, filthy, massive, and fearsome. They are other, pure evil, not human. The problem is that despite Michael's flat and totally unsophisticated understanding of this trope, this is just not how the world works. It's a fiction built on a stereotype, and it's a stereotype that has been invoked by people since before the first writers to cast aspersions on their real human adversaries by framing those whom we hate as orcs. It becomes easier, more palatable to oppose them, to denigrate them, to disenfranchise them, to displace them, to enslave them, to kill them, to exterminate them. Are there actually orcs out there? Were the Canaanites orcs?
Okay, Kipp, you don't understand the analogy yet again. I'm not
And
saying
he doesn't
that
understand literature.
Oh my god. I'm not,
I mean,
I
that
did
was
not
such
say-
that was one of the craziest explanations of the orcs in the Lord of the Rings I've ever seen.
Yeah.
He doesn't get it.
I haven't read The Lord of the Rings. I think the series is boring as fuck. I tried. I couldn't get through it. And I know that, like, thousands of people are going to hate me for this.
I think Tolkien is the second power in heaven, Kipp, so be careful.
Well, right. So, to be fair, I don't read a lot of fiction that is not already 2,000 years old. So, you know, this is kind of the world that I'm sorry. Was that too subtle? Was that not subtle enough?
Oh, no, just I don't know.
That was beautiful on like 16 different levels.
So the point I think that I made clearly was that I thought I was trying to be pretty careful to deal with the cinematic portrayal because that's what I know, right? So this is what I see in Jackson's interpretation of Tolkien. Admittedly, I don't know Tolkien well outside of Jackson's portrayal, and I never claim to. What I'm doing and what I'm dealing with is what I see on the screen, and I have to say this is what I see. And if I don't know the literature, fine. Don't really care. But insofar as the cinematic portrayal of the orcs is concerned in Peter Jackson's films, I don't think I'm wrong. And I can enjoy this as fiction, but I also recognize that within these fictional worlds, we make these very sharp, unrealistic distinctions between light and dark and good and evil, because that's how you make a story work well, or poorly if you do it. If you go too hard, but that's another story, right? So now what I'm trying to point out here is the inherent danger in starting to apply these fictional tropes back onto something like human nature. And I don't understand how Michael and David can't see this is what happens, right? People make these sorts of stereotypes that we see in this cinematic universe and apply those in the real world. So when I see Michael saying something like, you know, a good way to think about the Canaanites is like the orcs, you damn well better believe I'm coming down on that, because fucking no, if you knew anything about the Canaanites, then you would not, or you should not be saying that.
Even if the details are not mapping on, because some people would argue that actually, and I think this is what they go to argue, they would argue that what Tolkien was doing was personifying industrialization by the orcs. It's still deeply problematic.
They just emerge out of the earth, right?
Yes, yeah, they don't even have mothers. This is what we do. We want to dehumanize others in order to justify the atrocities. It's what Voltaire said. Those that can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. And that is what we've learned throughout history again and again and again. That's what you do. What did the Nazi Germans call Jews? Rats. Use those kinds of words. You depicted them as orcs, if you will. What did the Romans do when they were conquering Gaul? They referred to them as barbarians. Same connotations. What did the Japanese call the Chinese during, like Unit 731? They called them logs. right? Like, it's literally dehumanizing them. They're not humans, they're logs. And this is exactly what you see when you see Christians and apologists trying to justify the conquest of Canaan, a conquest that didn't happen. What they're trying to do is find a way to be able to say, no, these people deserved it. And they have to bend over backwards and use these analogies in order to achieve it, because it's the only way that any of this becomes even remotely fucking palatable. It's insane. This is what apologetics boils down to. Defending the reprehensible while claiming that somehow morality is on your side. It's disgraceful. And what you're emphasizing here is just pointing out the dehumanization, which of course they're not going to grab hold of that. They're rather going to find some kind of, small thing that you're wrong on or something, and they dismiss the whole thing and go from there, really.
He doesn't get it.
They're elves.
They're elves.
They're corrupted elves. The whole point is that they're inherently good at the beginning, and then they get turned evil by Melkor the Morgoth.
Yeah.
Okay.
That doesn't fix it, Michael. Like, what? They were originally good, but now they're justified. Now we're justified to treat that doesn't do any of the work you think it does. This is not a refutation.
I was going to say, since Josh keeps all 3 volumes on his bedside beside his collection of Middle Assyrian laws.
And the Silmarillion. Whatever that one is. That's a good one. Sorry. That's terrible.
Sorry.
And they're an analogy of industrialization. Not because they build factories, they cut down trees. They're the agrarian versus industrialization dichotomy.
David, this doesn't defend the point. Like, what do you do?
So they're the good guys? I don't understand.
The whole point is that you're demonizing the entirety of the people. Like, this doesn't fix it.
Yeah, but they were elves. For 9 hours.
For 9 hours they were elves. It's like, is it just if we passionately yell things at the camera, it's somehow a refutation? Like, what is this?
Oh, God.
Here's the thing to keep in mind. Okay, I didn't say the Canaanites are orcs, the Israelites are humans, therefore they have a right to go in and slaughter them. That is not what I said, Kipp. That is never what I said. I said human nature in this world is most going to be aligned with, of the races of Middle Earth, the orcs. They're the only species that rapes, pillages, murders, kills, builds weapons of war, industry. So who would more, if you're going to bring the races into this world, who would most likely commit the Holocaust, the rape of Nanking, Rwandan genocide? Okay, well, it's not going to be the humans of the Tolkien's humans, that is. Okay, my whole point was God has a right to judge, not humans. God has a right to judge if this is what human nature is most like. Okay, I did not say that justifies humans deciding to go around and do whatever they want to do because they deem other people orcs. I said all humans have a corrupt nature. So get the analogy right.
Come on.
You can attack me.
Come on, Michael. It's clear that Kipp has proven you are a racist.
Not even like attempting to be charitable with what I was.
No. He was fully implying that you are a racist.
That escalated quickly.
I never noticed that he put up on the screen.
Yeah, what is that? I didn't see that. Can you go back and pause those? Because seriously,
he was fully implying that you.
All right, let's see. This is wow. I'm in a slideshow. All right, so he's got a quote of me saying, "I won't debate whether things like slavery, genocide, rape, or murder are moral. I just won't. I'm not a philosopher of ethics, and if you want to argue for the morality of these atrocious behaviors, you can do it elsewhere."
So he was bringing this up a while back, where he was basically saying that you won't participate in philosophical dialogue because you're interested in the historicity. So he was just basically using this to go, oh look, you won't talk about these topics.
Yeah.
Is this a flex for him?
It's a gotcha.
So wait,
I think it is.
Let me just make sure I understand correctly. So I say I'm not a philosopher of ethics.
Mm-hmm.
I don't lose any sleep at night starting with rape, bad. Slavery, bad. Genocide, bad. Like, I don't lose any sleep. I don't lie awake and go, man, shouldn't I really be able to justify that owning another person's property is immoral? God, what am I doing with my life? Like, no, I just start there, right? Now, and do I poo-poo that people do that? Fucking of course not. I think that's a really important thing to do because there are dumbass people out there that make that argument that slavery's okay.
Sadly.
Right?
Sadly.
So I'm glad that we have people out there that do ethics and philosophy. I'm really glad about that. I'm not one, so I'm not going to wade into that argument with somebody. If somebody wants to approach me and say, oh, yeah, well, yeah, slavery in the Hebrew Bible, yeah, that's the bad kind of slavery, but how do you know that it's immoral? I'm done. Now, if I'm trying to be charitable, because again, I don't know why he's got this up here. I don't remember if he did cover it. I know that he said somewhere that Josh has said, like, he doesn't deal in philosophy.
Yeah.
Because I said, yeah, I don't. And I apologized if I said anything that, like, or accidentally moved into, like, I was making some argument about the philosophy of ethics. I'm very sorry. Like, that was unintentional, because this is the position that I try to hold to, is that this is where I stop. I just assume that it's wrong and move on and leave that to the experts, because I'm not one. So if you want to flex on me about that, I mean, like, have at it. Maybe that's not what he was doing. I don't know, but I don't know, does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And this is the thing, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but I don't think that when Josh and I are critiquing Michael for suggesting that we should view the Canaanites through this Tolkien lens as if they're orcs, I don't feel like we are making or engaging in a philosophical discussion at that point. I never recognized that. And maybe I'm wrong for failing to see that, right?
I mean, I think the key takeaway, and I actually do think that this is a fair criticism from mainly Michael, not so much David, is what you're saying in that tweet, Josh, is wrong, right? What you should be doing is actually standing on stage when you're offered the opportunity, and even though you don't have a philosophy degree and you haven't really done a cursory bit of study into it, or whatever it might be, you need to get on stage and be very confident. You need to make statements that are completely contradicting the scholarly consensus to really embody it. Like, that's like, this is the lesson they're imparting. So, like, this is what you should be doing, not going, hey, this isn't my field of expertise, leave me alone, I'm trying to make a point that is not relating to this. That's the key takeaway, I think. So getting back to what they just had to say, it really did escalate very quickly, and in doing so it completely fell apart at the seams, because what we had is multiple shifts in defenses. He was like just throwing everything at the wall. I don't know why, but that's what we got. First of all, he claimed that it's just an analogy. Then why did you use the analogy in the first place, Michael? You obviously thought that it mapped on in some crucial way. They're the orcs, they're the bad guys. So what does Kipp say? Yeah, they're the orcs, they're the bad guys. This is used in order to demonize your enemy. Oh, no, whoa, it's only an analogy. Like, what are you doing? Yeah, exactly the analogy that you were using it for. He then says that the orcs represent human nature. Falk says that the orcs represent industrial revolution, as if that somehow, like...
agrarians versus industrialists.
Exactly. As if that somehow dilutes, the point that you were making. It doesn't. And then he finally says, almost as a therefore as well, he says that God gets to claim what is good judgment. Sorry, where did this come from? Where is this coming from?
Yeah.
Do you want to defend that? Like, it's just come out of nowhere, like Mary Poppins. And then, of course, he navigated to, modern atrocities such as the Holocaust, the Rwandan genocide, to justify ancient ones. In that context, it's a mess. It's completely fallen apart.
Is she called Mary Poppins because she pops in and then pops back out?
Yeah, out of fucking nowhere. That's it.
Is it?
What? Is it really? No way.
Yeah, because she like pops in.
Yeah.
Out of nowhere from the sky.
Pops back out. Are you just fucking with me? Like, because I'm really proud of myself, if that's right. I'm writing an article on this.
Way.
If you do, then you have to somehow explain Sherry Bobbins. Where does that? How does that fit in? So are they so historically illiterate as to fail to recognize that in the Rwandan genocide, the Hutus actually committed their atrocities on the conviction that they had a divine warrant to do so? God told them to do this as far as they were concerned. And that's, I mean, how do they not see that that's the problem? How do you miss this? You know, when I teach Introduction to the Old Testament and I teach the Deuteronomistic history in the book of Deuteronomy, I actually start with the Rwandan genocide. And I start with a publication from the Hutu government powers called the Hutu Ten Commandments, which is, you know, a rather visceral, I don't know if that's the right word here. It's a rather stark illustration of what something like the book of Deuteronomy looks like in a modern context, right? And the whole thing is just an outright dehumanization and othering of this rival group of people, this minority group of people, in an effort to promote your own hegemony and your own self-interest. How do you guys miss this stuff?
On that bombshell, it's been 9 hours, guys. Woo! 9 hours! 9 hours!
9 hours.
Woo!
Very good. Look at Josh. Look at Josh stroking his beard there. It's very...
That's it.
This is going to be the new thing now, isn't it?
Doesn't even look like you have a chin under there anymore.
It looks great, though, dude. I make fun only because I am just seething with jealousy on the inside. I'm
That is very, very kind.
If you had the same beard, Kipp, you would legit look like Jesus, and then you would be public enemy #1. That would be it. Game over.
Yes.
Am I allowed to make a shameless plug?
Not only are you allowed, I insist that you both do, but just before you do, everyone, listen up. Like, it takes so much hard work behind the scenes that doesn't come to the forefront of these videos. Of course, that's what it means to be behind the scenes. The notes that Josh and Kipp have, the interactions on our WhatsApp group, most of it's good. And
scotch. Sometimes it takes scotch.
Exactly, a lot of scotch. It really is a lot of hard work, and there's a reason why a lot of scholars don't interact with apologetics. They kind of like scoff and just go, this is stupid, and they get on with their lives, and fair play to them. But it takes a lot of energy, a lot of effort to step up and have these dialogues, to interact with counter-apologetic channels like myself, like Apologia, like Myth Vision. And so, yeah, please do head over to their channels. If you've got the money and you've got the inclination, check out their books. They're an asset that's absolutely needed, perhaps more now than certainly decades. So just from my point of view, guys, thank you so much for your time, for your energy, for your efforts. It really does make a difference, and we greatly appreciate you.
It's very kind and generous. Thank you.
That's very nice. Yeah.
Now, shameless plug. Go, go, go.
So Megan has started, we've been doing it for 2 semesters now, so I guess maybe 7 months, but we're sort of in full force. She's really set up a good system for teaching ancient languages. So this semester, I just started on Wednesday. I have another class tomorrow afternoon, and then I have another class Monday evening. I'm doing 3 classes this semester. I'm teaching Intro to Biblical Hebrew. I'm teaching the final semester of Intro to Biblical Hebrew, and then I'm teaching Intro to Sumerian. We also have an Egyptologist who is teaching Middle Egyptian. Coming up, for those who don't get it in time for whatever reason, Kipp, I'll let you talk about it, but Kipp is also prepping an Introduction to Biblical Hebrew course. And
less beard, less bow tie. That's the big difference, right?
More heavy metal. So
yeah, it's choose your own adventure.
We'll be doing this, cycling through. If you miss a class, like if you miss the start of a semester or a cycle, don't worry. Megan is putting an interest sign-up sheet sort of thing together. So if you go to the landing page, it's like Digital Hammurabi language classes, I think is what it is. You can either email us directly or put us on the contact page, but she's going to be putting up at some point like a language request sheet or something. If we have enough interest in like learn Intro to Akkadian or learn Intro to Sumerian, another class or whatever, then we'll see about starting another class. So
wonderful.
Yeah, if you are interested in those languages, or if you want to donate, there are lots of people in the community that are interested in doing this but don't have the money. Even though we're trying to keep the prices, as low as possible, we still have to entice the instructor, like Kipp, to make it worth his time to come and teach a course like that. So we have a couple of people who donated essentially scholarships to fund a student.
Oh, phenomenal. That's so great.
So it was really great. So yeah, please check that out. Digital Hammurabi language classes. I'll send you the link.
I think I have to point out that it is an absolute bargain, given that if you go to a university, even just to audit, I think a course in Hebrew, you're probably still already paying 4 times what we're going to charge. So
we started it actually because we didn't know, and we started it kind of even lower than what it is now. And I mean, like the classes just filled up.
Boom.
It was like, okay, we probably need to be charging a little bit more.
So for anyone and everyone who is interested in that, please do check them out. It'll be pinned down below, so you'll be able to see it in the description. You'll be able to see it as the pinned comment. Show some love, get on over there, and start speaking different languages. All right. With that, thank you so much for your time. I'm hoping we can do something like this again in the future when some other apologists decides to get on stage and be an authority when they're not. But until then, keep kicking ass, keep making that wonderful content, keep producing those courses. We love seeing you around in the sphere. Just thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Stephen.
It's been great. Thanks.